Hello everyone. I don't want to be afraid to express my half-assedness, so here goes. I wanted to create a camera jib because I'm done with dealing with tripods. Tripods are a nuisance unless you are in an environment made for using a tripod. My environment is riddled with tools, tables, and chairs that constantly get in the way. When I start a video, I need to think about how to position the camera. But the camera position relies on the tripod, which has a triangular structure that doesn't allow the camera to be positioned easily. When the tripod is carefully adjusted and the camera is viewing the subject perfectly, the legs of the tripod will have a configuration that will cause a tripping hazard, potentially causing injury, or worse, losing a perfect shot. I'm constantly hitting the tripod while moving around the subject, typically hitting the tripod with my chair because my subject is usually at my computer. If my camera needs to have a view that is farther away from the subject, I now have to tend with where the camera power is connected, which causes an even more dangerous situation. And I always seem to walk in the most dangerous areas where I trip over the cable or I hit the cord and move the camera. By the way, I'll be showing off my new microscope, which is the sponsor of this video, so stay tuned. And if you are interested in getting a microscope that can be moved around to pinpoint any part of a subject, not unlike what I want for my camera jib, then support me by grabbing one for yourself. I may get a small commission. I had a lot of requirements for a camera jib. The most important feature was the ability to move the camera effortlessly, so it needed to be weightless and could move laterally to any area of the shop. The camera needed to be plugged into my main computer at all times for remote control and to be able to see what the camera sees so I can be sure that the subject is always in focus. This required a data cable run, which also included a power cord to eliminate the need for batteries in the camera. Though these requirements for the camera jib seem simple, the implementation is far from simple. Not as important, but still needed to be considered, was to make the whole structure above my head height, so I wouldn't bump my head into any part of it. Through my design process, I investigated many camera jib types. I wanted to design the camera jib in CAD and cut out the parts on my CNC, and I did for the first iteration, but it failed miserably. Before I get into that design, let's look at some of the ideas that I had first. Inspiration at the beginning of the process was the camera articulating swing arm shown on Inheritance Machining. He made a wonderful camera arm that resembled a lamp arm. I started researching lamp arms, and the variety is extremely broad, from the angel pose to counterweight assisted to complex spring linkage designs. The research was overwhelming, which was the beginning of my analysis paralysis. I wanted to design a swing arm like the one on Inheritance Machining, but I wanted to have the rotating part mounted to the ceiling, which required flipping the swing arm. I tried various configurations of the joints, but I just couldn't achieve the desired reach. The first design had a slewing bearing mounted to the ceiling and contained 3 joints. I believe this to be a solid design, but in my mind, it seemed clunky and I just knew there was a simpler approach. The novel idea to this structure was the many linkages that could be used to stiffen the structure to hold the weight, but then it may be too difficult to move, without quite a bit of finesse with the tightening of all the screws and nuts. By the way, if you're still watching, thank you so much. If you haven't already, click on the subscribe button and the thumbs up, and make a comment if you wish. I think that probably helps my channel, but it definitely helps my dopamine levels. The lamp arm idea put me on a brainstorming route investigating the human skeletal mechanism. I just happen to have a friend that studies and practices this as he's a doctor in the biomechanical field. I also consulted LLMs like ChatGPT or Claude to get an intuition of where the stresses are in such a mechanism. The LLM stated that the joints will have the most stress, and that was also confirmed by my friend. But I still wanted to add some structure at the midpoints of the arms because I didn't want any bending to happen. I then started looking up camera jibs on the internet and noticed a variety of structures, mainly with a long telescoping rod that was assisted with tension line, reducing a bending moment due to the weights at both ends. The actual weight at one end for the counterweight and the weight of the actual camera and the extension of the rod. But this didn't seem like a viable approach because the movement of that type of structure seemed more difficult. In other words, I didn't want to create rails on my ceiling to move this thing around. That led me to an interesting scissor structure. I thought, if the scissor telescoped the weight of the camera, structure, and the counterbalance weight, this should work at any position. But I had doubts that the counterbalance would be a linear balance due to the idea of torque where the weight changes dramatically with the telescope position of the camera. Moreover, my doctor friend reminded me that the scissor mechanism would tend to curve over the entire structure. And I immediately said to myself, that's exactly right, and the mechanism would be way too complicated for this implementation in my shop. I finally decided to implement the idea that worked like a hybrid of the swing arm and a hinge design. The design was similar to a lot of the multiple display mounts out there that allow the display to move horizontally, and similar to this new microscope I received for free from a company that wanted me to show it off. I said to myself, I could probably use a microscope that could be moved around in a similar way to how I want my new camera jib to move around. And this is a perfect transition to talk about the new microscope. The assembling of the microscope was quite simple, but the instructions could use larger images as I am going blind in my old age. I managed to get the plastic piece that covers the clamping portion backwards, causing the entire arm to be slightly angled. After I fixed that, the arm worked like a charm. Some of the assembly seemed unintuitive, but after it went all together, it made sense. A link to this microscope can be found in the description. After using the microscope, I can assure you that I was thoroughly pleased with how well I could see my PCBs with the tiny legs of the STM32 microcontroller. This is crucial because it allows me to see any bridges and how well each leg is soldered to the pads. Help me and the channel by clicking on the link and getting one yourself. Okay, so here's what the hybrid swing arm looked like, but it was a disaster. The first portion of the swinging hinge structure rotated with the help of 1/2 inch rod, which admittedly was not strong enough for the weight of the structure, but I still had some hope that it would work, until I installed the second part of the structure, a parallelogram that allowed the up and down movement of the camera at the end. But this part of the structure twisted the first section. This was a major failure, so I took it apart, slept on it, and said to myself, I'm overthinking this totally. I just need to create a simple, stable structure that has rails on the ceiling. So I'm back to the rails. I was so motivated to get something done that I didn't want to make a video anymore. I mean, it was just too much to deal with the idea of tripping over a tripod or losing a shot because of moving the tripod in some way. And sometimes I like to be creative and make stop action video. So moving a tripod in that sense would be game over for hours of work. So I scrapped all of the previous ideas. The analysis paralysis didn't allow me to continue with my creative journey, and I think it was more important for me to create something that I could use. That I just went ahead and just cobbled something together with just scraps, and I think that's probably one of the better things that I've done lately is gone back to my roots and created something from scratch. Not using the CNC machine. After the failed piece that I created, the one that was twisting. That was created from CAD. I did so much research and then it just failed. So sometimes just cobbling something up, making something shabby, or just testing the design is just the way to go. And in this case, it was. So I decided to get a bunch of scrap wood of varying thicknesses and cobble together what I was thinking. I almost didn't show this video due to the rough look of the camera jib, but I believe in sharing the raw process of making and brainstorming with whatever materials are on hand. So what do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The main aspect of this camera jib was a very long straight structure, which, when weighted at both ends, curved like crazy. This is why all of the professional jibs have a tension line at the top. I implemented this tension line right after cobbling together the whole structure. It worked like a charm. This also almost completely eliminated any up and down oscillations at the camera extreme end, an issue I knew I needed to face. This long structure consisted of some of the parts of the failed hybrid hinge structure. It pivoted on some cobbled up structure that mounted to a huge 14-inch diameter slewing bearing. This bearing is awesome, and if you're looking for a slewing bearing, I will leave a link in the description along with the other useful items and tools. The rails I used is the same rails that Inheritance Machining used, called Unistrut. I'll add a link for that in the description as well. I also made my own set of bearing trucks for this Unistrut, which was a drama all on its own. I used 1/4" ID bearings initially, but changed to 1/2" ID bearings, which slide much better because they fit into the Unistrut snugly rather than moving side to side. To make matters worse, there is no space for a screw and nut to hold the bearings, so I just used a spare 1/2" rod, cut them to the width of the inside of the Unistrut so the bearings would not slide off. When I used the 1/4" bearings, I peened the ends of the 1/4" rod to hold the bearings in, but this wasn't needed for the 1/2" bearings. These 1/2" ID bearings slide like butter. To counterbalance this really long arm and relatively heavy camera, I used scrap linear rails as the counterbalance because these things are heavy. It didn't take many of these to serve as a good counterweight, and with the numerous mounting holes, it was a cinch to apply to the arm. But these will hurt if I bump my head, so I obviously padded them. The only thing I need to address at this point is the side-to-side oscillation. It's not a huge problem as I can stop the oscillations by carefully positioning the camera, which is way better than setting up a tripod. I believe I only need to tension lines on both sides of the arm, like I did on the top of the arm. The camera jib works so well that I'm so excited to make videos again. I haven't created an idea like this in so many years. Back when I started this channel, I made a CNC machine using a saw and a miter box in my apartment bedroom. I believe it is important to work with your hands and think through the design process. Cobbling something together with a lot of iterative thought and design is so rewarding. Even though the implementation may not look good, it functions exactly how I expect it to function. If I wanted to make more of these, I now have a very good prototype and the knowledge to make a better design if I ever decide to put this in production. But I'm not going to, because I'm content with what I've put together. Furthermore, it won't be shot by the camera, so it doesn't really need to look good. I don't want to be afraid to express my half-assedness, and I don't think you should either. The process of making is so rewarding. Thank you for watching.